Well, we're going to start at the absolute beginning with the basic notion that in the endgame, the king becomes a strong piece. And it might be worth dwelling a little bit at this moment about what constitutes an endgame, because I'm not altogether sure that it's been well defined in chess literature. What actually is an endgame? When does an endgame start? Well, I think the best way to define this is to say that the endgame starts when a player feels that he or she can bring their king out into the game. I think that's as good a definition as I can come up with at this stage. Frankly, I've seen games where the queens are exchanged at a very early stage, and then people start talking about the endgame, whereas what they in fact are referring to is a queenless middle game. No, I think the endgame starts when the kings can be introduced into the fray. In the endgame, the king should be used actively and aggressively. To highlight that, I've got a game from the World Open in 1993, and I think it's valuable to go through complete games, because it shows you how the endgame comes naturally out of the opening and the middle game. And it's a game between Benjamin Feingold, Grandmaster, and a player called Kyaw playing with the black pieces. So white opens with d4, and black plays the King's Indian defence. g6, bishop g7, and then d6. I should say at this point that the King's Indian is not really an opening for beginners, because black allows white to take the centre. The King's Indian, from black's perspective, is an opening of good timing. When you allow the enemy to take the centre at an early stage of the game, you are taking a small risk, because if white gets to consolidate the centre, he can establish a big advantage in space out of the opening, and that's the last thing you want against a really strong player. You can be squeezed in the King's Indian defence, run out of play, if you don't find the best moment to time your counter-attack against the white centre. So black's looking to counter-attack against this centre and to destabilise it at the right moment in the opening phase of the game. Now, there are many systems that white can adopt against the King's Indian. Here, Feingold plays a very straightforward system called the classical variation, where white just contents himself with a three-pawn centre and develops his pieces, seemingly getting ready to castle. So black decides this is the right moment to challenge in the centre, and he plays e5, which actually is the main line. Now, black has tried other moves in this position. He can avoid playing in the centre for the time being by playing, for instance, knight bd7. That's an older line. He can play knight a6. Again, just delaying the idea of countering the centre. Black usually reacts with e5, but he could also react with c5 in this line. Black can also play c6, which is a very cagey move, and he can also play c5. But none of these variations has really become as popular as a straightforward move, e5. And black's play depends tactically on the idea that white can't grab a pawn. For instance, d takes e5, queen takes d8, rook takes d8, and now if white plays knight takes e5, it's well known that black can respond with knight takes e4, getting a good position because he's counter-attacking against the knight on e5. Now, if we just drop back to e5, again, white has many moves in this position. He can block the centre. That's the Petrosian variation. Play slows down for the time being. It's important in this line that white has not yet castled. Sometimes white can even start an attack against the black king by pushing his kingside pawns in this line. White can play the Gligorich variation, bishop e3, solid and flexible, making no commitments in the centre just yet. White can castle. That is the classical main line, I would say. That's the move that's played most frequently in this position. Or he can play, as Feingold does in the game, the exchange variation, d takes e5. Now, this is the type of move which actually makes a lot of players of the King's Indian's hearts sink, because it's a rather dry way to play the position. But I'm sure Feingold's idea in this game is that he's the better player and he wants to win without tears. He's going to construct a technical position and he's going to try to outplay his lesser ranked opponent by simply draining all the life out of the position, taking all the tactics away. And black has to be careful in this position. Obviously, white doesn't go in for the prospectless knight takes e5. There are two better moves. White can play knight d5 here. That's an interesting way to play. The idea is that when black takes, white might get some pressure along the c-file. Usually black can do something about that quite easily by playing c6. Or, going back to our featured game, he can play bishop g5. And that actually sets up a game-winning threat. White is threatening bishop takes f6, followed by knight d5, after which there's a fork on the pawn at c7 and the bishop at f6. So black has to decide how he's going to react to this idea. And in this particular game, Kyaw played rook e8, which again is a perfectly reasonable move. There are other moves. Black's played knight a6, he's played knight bd7, he's played c6. There's nothing wrong with rook e8. And the idea, of course, is that if white goes through with his threat, then black can easily deal with this move by playing bishop d8. It looks a bit peculiar with all of the black pieces on the back rank, but black's going to soon knock the knight away with c6, and he has two nice bishops. That's the problem for white, I think, with this variation. In that, in order to play this way, white has had to give black unchallenged control of the d4 square. That's what we call a hole. It's a hole because if a black piece sinks on d4, white can't get rid of it by pushing it away with a pawn. Let's contrast that with the square d5. That is what we call an outpost. It's not a hole because if a white knight hops into d5, black can get rid of it by playing c6 if he wants to at the right moment. So the difference between an outpost and a hole is very simple. A hole means that the piece can't be gotten rid of by an enemy pawn, whereas an outpost means it can be. So black played rook e8, and white continued with theoretical moves here. He castled on the queen side. And now black plays pawn up to c6. Again, a very useful move, keeping the white knight out of d5. Now Feingold plays a little tactical idea. Knight takes e5. And the idea of that is that if black goes rook takes e5 in this position, then rook d8 check is a rather embarrassing move. What is black to play here? If he plays rook e8, we can go bishop takes f6, and we've won a pawn. If he goes bishop f8, well, we can take on f6 in this position, again with a win. And finally, if he goes knight e8 in this position, well, then we just take the bishop on c8. And in every case, white is winning, because, of course, if rook takes g5, rook takes e8, and black is all tied up. So Kyaw answers this with the approved move, knight takes e4. Okay, Feingold takes that knight, black takes on e5, and now knight comes into d6. Another very tricky move. Black's probably got to take that knight, and now white recaptures with the rook. Again, a move which tries to take advantage of the fact that black hasn't developed any queenside pieces. So black could, if he wished, take on e2 in this position, but then comes rook d8 check again, and black gets into a mess because his pieces are very tied up on the queen side. It's hard to see how he's going to get out of this pin. Meanwhile, white has easy ideas of rook d1 and then rook d8, simply winning the pin knight. So that's why, going back to the game, black plays bishop f5. Bishop e3, knight comes out to d7, and now king to d2. Now this is, for me, an interesting move. Is this a middle game, or are we actually coming to the end of the middle game and starting to think about the end game? Because Feingold is getting ready with his king. Black can't do the same, notice. One of the biggest problems for black in this position is that white's dark square bishop is a very, very strong piece. And I don't think that the black knight is anything like the equal of the dark square bishop. And the dark square bishop is so strong and it stops the black king from coming into the game. I think that's the best way to put it. Whereas white can get his king ready for the endgame by bringing it up slowly, black can't do the same. Black has got to basically angle for exchanges here, but this is kind of playing into Feingold's hands. So white takes on d8, black recaptures, and now white plays a steady, strengthening move. f6 by black, getting ready to bring the king in, by f7, and white plays a4. So I think with that exchange of rooks, we really are now getting very close to what we could consider as an endgame. White is gaining some space on the queen side. White, to my mind, has an obvious advantage here. He's got the better placed king, he's got two nice bishops, and he's got pressure against black's queen side. The problem with black's position is that it's very passive. Black lacks counterplay. In general, I think white's starting to probe the black queen side. He's trying to penetrate the queen side at some point in the upcoming play. And black has no way to stop him from doing this. Black's just got to try to not make things worse and to try to keep the game in balance. A very difficult task. So black plays a6. Well, at least that frees up his knight. The knight could not move because the pawn on a7 was hanging. So a6, and now Feingold moves his king closer to the action. So Feingold is really trying to prove that the king is a very strong piece in this position. Black tries to do the same, and now another very interesting move here, rook to d1. Well, in its own way, in its own positional way, that's a pretty good move because white exchanges off black's only really influential and active piece, the rook on d8. But there are many who would have shied away from this exchange, fearing that there wasn't enough in this position to win it. But Feingold has seen a bit further than that, and he starts now to probe the black position on both flanks, with h4, bishop f5, g4, and then the king comes even closer. When you've got the bishop pair, generally playing on both sides of the board is a good idea. The idea is that the knight is a slow-moving piece and can't cope with action spread all over the board. So bishop to d3, king to d4, bishop to f1, bishop to f4. White maintains a nice, stable advantage. But black does as best he can now by bringing his king into the action. Bishop c2, bishop h3, and white plays bishop d3. In its own way, this is a well-played endgame by Feingold because he's adhering to the maxim that when you have the advantage in the endgame, there's no real need to rush. He's not rushing this, he's just manoeuvring, he's waiting to see how black's going to play this position, and, you know, at his leisure, he's going to make his move. So black just moved his king back, not making things worse, and now white, to a degree, shows his hand. He plays b4. And with this, I think we can start to understand white's winning plan. What white wants to do is to target black's queenside pawns, particularly the one on b7. And the way he's going to do this is to open up lines with b5. Now at this point, black will have a really big decision to make. Is he going to capture on b5 or is he going to leave it as it is? If he leaves it, white can consider taking either of those pawns on c6 or a6 and then manoeuvring this bishop into the fray. We'll see something like this in the game, and actually black is really hard pressed to do anything against this plan. His bishop's a bit shut out at the moment. He tries to get it back into the game. Feingold is happy to take, and now b5. This is the crux of the matter. But did you notice that when black played h5, he's now given himself additional weaknesses to worry about? And in fact, in the end, white comes across with his king and gobbles those kingside pawns. What we've got there, both sides have two isolated pawns on the king side, but it's easier for white to attack those pawns because he's got the bishop pair. Black's got a real serious problem here with his knight. The knight is really in a bad way. So, after b5, black took it. White recaptured. Black took it again. That's all right. The idea is that he's following the notion that one should exchange pawns in this position. The less pawns, the less chance white's got of queening a pawn. But now Feingold plays a really good move. Bishop to e4. Knight comes to a7. Bishop b7. Black plays bishop c8, white goes bishop d5 check, bishop comes to e6, and now bishop to b8. The outside passed pawn on a5 is going to tie black down completely. Well, that knight is on pre at the moment. He moves it to c8. White pushes his passed pawn. Now he's simply threatening to push this pawn all the way through. Black tries to counter it by pushing the passed pawn of his own. White takes on e6. Black recaptures. And now king c4. Using the king actively and aggressively to go after the black pawn. Black tries to send the white king further away from the action by decoying and sacrificing his pawn. White takes it. Black brings his king across, but the power of the passed pawn in this position is the most important aspect of this endgame. Black is distracted. He's got to use his knight and his king to look after the passed pawn. Meanwhile, white has a field day on the king side. The first plan is to send the knight to a8. The second plan is to bring the king in, because by now, black is all tied up. White, unfortunately, can't be stopped from bringing the king in, and fine gold shows how important it is to have an active king in these positions. The knight comes to d3, the bishop comes to d4, knight f4, king f5, the king is active to the last, and after knight h3, bishop e3 was a cute move to finish the game. Black is out of moves, and his knight is trapped. On the next turn, white is simply going to play king g6, and then gobble up the last black pawn. So that was a very, very good technical performance by Feingold. The way he manoeuvred with his king was excellent. He demonstrated conclusively that having an active, aggressive king in the endgame can really help you to win, and in the end, it was the white king which was going to administer the final blow.